Good evening and welcome. My name is Pat Kowitzel. I am the buyer and author program coordinator at Magic City Books, and I want to thank you all for spending a little bit of your Monday evening with us. If you're joining us from Tulsa, hope you enjoyed this kind of temperate day in Tulsa, where it's mid-July and not hot as hot as the face of the sun. If you're joining us from somewhere else, welcome, and especially if you're joining us for the very first time, we offer you a very warm Magic City Books welcome. Magic City Books is a nonprofit bookstore located in downtown Tulsa. That model is a little bit different than most, and so the books that you buy and the events that you attend from Magic City Books help keep us able to fund and funnel more author programs in. And we're really excited to be starting to do some in-person programming here in the coming weeks and months, but we will also be continuing to offer virtual programs. And if you're joining us from far away, then you can keep joining us. You can keep tuning in for these great author programs that we offer a couple times a week and have been doing since last April. Recordings of over 150 of those programs are available on our YouTube channel, and so you can just search Magic City Books on YouTube. And we've got a few more coming up, and so visit magiccitybooks.com to see kind of what is coming up in the days, weeks, and months ahead. We're really excited tonight to offer not just one great author, but two great authors. We're joined by an excellent moderator, a good friend of ours, Kevin Smokler, who is the author of 3 books about pop culture and the co-director of the 2020 documentary Vinyl Nation about the comeback of vinyl records in America. Kevin also joined us for another program last year where we talked to Amy Bender, and like I said, you can find that on our YouTube channel. Amy's novel, The Butterfly Lampshade, was one of the great books of last year, and one that we were really excited about and enjoyed and encourage you to pick up. Tonight's author, Katherine Seligman, is the author of At the Edge of the Haight, and I wanted to just share with you what Barbara Kingsolver had to say about the book, which is what a read this is, right from its startling opening scene. But even more than plot, it's the richly layered details that drive home a lightning bolt of empathy. To read the book is to live inside the everyday terror and longings of a world that most of us manage not to see, even if we walk past it on sidewalks every day. At a time when more Americans than ever find themselves at the edge of homelessness, this book couldn't be more timely. Here in Tulsa, homelessness is an issue that faces our community just as it does all across the United States, and it's one of the ways that we really believe that fiction can play a role is that allows us to get inside the heads of the characters and kind of feel from their standpoint, and that's one of the things that we love most about Katherine's book. And so we're really excited to be welcoming her tonight. There will be posted links in the chat to be able to purchase the book online. You can also, of course, come visit us at 221 East Archer Street in downtown Tulsa. Also, we want to hear from you. Please post your questions in the Q&A tonight, or if you're joining us over on Facebook, post your question in the comment, and we will get it over to Kevin so that we can answer as many of them as possible. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again at the store soon. And without any further ado, here is Kevin Smokler. Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Pat. And thanks, Magic City. It's so great to hear from you guys. Magic City is one of my favorite bookstores in the country. It is one of the great cities in the country. I know we have a bunch of people here from our home city of San Francisco. I encourage you all to visit the great city of Tulsa and places like Magic City Books. It's the crown jewel in a crown jewel city right in the middle of America. And friends from Tulsa, I really encourage you to visit Katherine and I and all of the great bookstores here in San Francisco, our hometown. San Francisco, in these later stages of the pandemic, is a surprisingly more affordable place to visit. So we really recommend you come by and see us, and we will make sure to take you to the Magic City equivalent. There are several, we hope, here in San Francisco. I am really fortunate to be talking to not only an author I admire, but a person I admire a great deal, and who's a friend of mine, Katherine Seligman. I am holding in my hands At the Edge of the Haight, which I finished, I think about 6 days ago. Yeah. And it just kind of followed me around until I was done with it. I love novels that are about pressing social issues and that don't feel like they have to split the baby and be one or the other, either be a novel that's only sort of about a pressing social issue, or that is a political pamphlet that's disguised as a novel. This actually manages to be both wonderfully seamlessly. So I hope we get into that. I hope we get into how Katherine came up with this great book and some of the issues it raises. But I'd kind of like to start with the origin question without actually asking the origin question. Because Katherine, it was very clear to me reading this book that this is not the sort of thing that one dreams up while sitting at one's author's desk and not engaging with the rest of the world. This seems to be a novel that requires a good deal of on-the-ground research and firsthand experience. So I guess I'd just like you to tell us about the research process that went into At the Edge of the Haight.
Thank you. And it's so great to be here with you and to be at this wonderful bookstore too. I just want to say, the book is really that the seeds of this book came from my living and writing in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco for more than 25 years. I've been a reporter here and a journalist and written a lot of stories about what was happening around me and in the city and in displaced communities in various places. But it's something else to see it unfold personally. And I think, a lot of people know Haight-Ashbury, they've heard about it, the center of the Summer of Love and what happened to draw huge crowds of young people here. And they've kept coming over the years, but the neighborhood's changed. It's gotten a lot less affordable. And despite being a very tolerant place, has struggled a lot with what to do with kids who are passing through. And so, with the sort of that as the backdrop, I had one night been driving through Golden Gate Park, which is right next to the Haight, and a man threw himself in front of the car and screamed for help. He said, somebody's trying to kill me. And we stopped, we called the cops, and they came and they shined a light into the grass alongside the road. And there was a body turned out to be a young man. My husband, who's been an ER doctor, got out of the car and saw this young man gasp his last breath. And in the end, they never really investigated this murder, which we didn't see it happen, but we sort of saw this aftermath and this young man just dying. And I asked the cop after the hearing was over, in which they decided they weren't going to investigate. And I said, how can you just let this happen? There are these two people and something happened, and it was just, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And he said something like, well, if you ask me, neither of them was up to any good. And so I just really started me thinking about the people that I was passing on the street and people I'd talked to and questioned and sometimes written about, and just, it really got to me how little I knew their stories. And that's really what, just the idea of that something like this could happen. And that was the seed of the story.
And as research, did that mean doing personal interviews? Did that mean talking to the institutions that serve this population? That
I did. And also, in the beginning, I was thinking whether to write it as nonfiction. And so I did set out to do a lot of research and found out who the young man was. It was indeed never written about, and ended up looking at various court records and interviewing people and spending a lot of time with the police in the neighborhood, who really are sort of more social workers than police in my particular district. And a lot of kids who had spent years living in the park. So I did put a lot of research into it, although I will say I didn't take anyone's story. It is completely fictional account of a murder and what can happen when two people come into close proximity and nobody knows their stories. So yes, but I did do quite a bit of research, and maybe more being a journalist than some people might have. There were two women that I talked to in great detail who were extremely generous with me, and they had both lived in the park for one for a year, one for more than 2 years. So it really helped me try to slip into the mind of this character.
Yeah. The novel begins with a murder. And as anybody who's, for example, produced a true crime podcast lately knows, it is very difficult to tell a story that begins with the murder and not have the ultimate purpose of the story be about solving the murder. This is, I like to call this the serial problem, where everybody thinks if you're talking about a murder, what you're actually talking about a whodunit, and the conversation around it will be the conversation that the work inspires will ultimately be about trying to solve the mystery. You have a murder at the very beginning of this book but the book is ultimately not about solving the mystery. The murder is in effect secondary to the main story of the characters themselves. And I'm curious as to how you made this decision to begin the story with a murder and yet not have its solution be the engine that drives the story itself.
Well, I thought a lot about how to start the story. And as people who've written nonfiction or particularly fiction, the beginning sometimes is elusive. It's really hard to figure out just where to start your story. So I played around a lot with how to do it. And I did know that I didn't want the murder to be something that everybody was reading, that carried the story, that carried all of the tension. So it was my hope to set it up that way and to immediately dig into the lives of the characters so that they became more of an engine for the story than the murder did. The question of how could this have happened? And what if, being a parent, what if my child ended up there? How would I feel? And that really drove a lot of the narrative in the story, because I couldn't stop thinking about that.
You raise a very interesting question about character development in a novel of this kind, where the setting is one that is based on transience, and by that I mean transience ending in CE, not TS. It's based on people coming out in and out of each other's lives. Same as if you set a novel in an airport. Like how do you respect the nature of that setting and yet still make sure the characters are not transient themselves, are not flat and shallow and fail to make an impression on the reader?
I think really of course, the city and the park are characters as well, which I'm sure you could say about, a lot of fiction, that place is incredibly important. And I think setting them in this place and showing in a way how they were not of this place did help do that. But one of the things I really learned a lot about when I was writing this book was the importance of sort of writing what you know, but towards what you don't know. So people have asked me, how could you have created this character? She is transient. You're not, you don't have this solid background for her. You're not showing her as she was created, as she became a person. And I think by placing her there and by also going into things that I did know, which is that like the main character whose name is Maddie and who leaves her chaotic background and flees to San Francisco. I mean, nothing like that happened to me, but I did grow up in a era and a neighborhood and a family where I really felt unseen. I mean, in Los Angeles, suburban Los Angeles, you could wake up in the morning and do anything. And my parents would not have known. I just felt utterly alone and unseen. And I know a lot of children do, but I certainly did. And I think that I was able to mine that sense of what it's like to just exist and have your own life and have your parents, they have no idea really who you are or what you're going through. So, I mean, I had a home and parents who, who cared about me, but were pretty absent. So that I was somehow able to step into that. And I do think that really helped me know this character.
I can tell, my favorite kinds of novels are the kinds where even if the story is being told primarily in the present, even if we get flashbacks, as we do here, we learn where Maddie came from before she ended up in Golden Gate Park. We learn about her mother and the foster home she lived in. But we can still imagine what this story, who these characters were, and what this story was before the novel begins, and we can imagine it afterwards too. And those are my favorite kinds of novels, where the narrative is big enough that even if you're telling a small story, you can do the Citizen Kane thing, where you can say, I can imagine before the beginning and I can imagine after the end. And I feel like that didn't happen by accident. Can you tell me, as the author, what went into this idea that even though this book, for example, ends on a note of uncertainty, there's still plenty of doors and windows open that we can imagine what would happen afterwards?
Well, I really felt that it was a situation that shouldn't be neatly tied up. And so I knew that going into it, there wouldn't be any kind of easy redemption, that it would be kind of uncertain. I mean, this goes to sort of why I chose to write it in the first person, kind of a geeky, crafty kind of question about it, but I did play around with writing it in third person and telling the story from different points of view. But ultimately, I decided that what I wanted, the only way I could do it was to write first person, so that the reader hopefully would feel like, as you say, that they know something about her and are even able to feel like, uh-oh, that's ridiculous. That is not going to end well. That is not a good thing to be doing. And so we're able to sort of know more and see a broader picture than she's really thinks she's giving us, and that we're in there observing her. And so that's what I tried to do.
I want to get into some of the social and political issues the book raises, but we have a question from the audience. Our friend Beth Weingartner asks, another San Francisco journalist, Vivian Ho, wrote a nonfiction book exploring unhoused youth and violence in San Francisco called Those Who Wander. Did you read this book, and did it influence the writing of At the Edge of the Haight?
That is a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because I actually had her book and did not read it till I was done, because I didn't want to be influenced by it. And I think it's really a well done book. It's a wonderful book. But I was just, I felt like if I did that, I was afraid that I would be, like taking some of the wonderful details that she had, and I know fairly well the case that she wrote about these kids, and actually looked up the court records on my own of that case and many other cases, just while I was sort of going down the rabbit hole of research. But so yeah, the answer is yes, I have read it, but no, I didn't read it before. And there are a number of books that I had that I didn't read before because I didn't want other people's voices to influence me. So
I really feel like all novels, once they exist, inherit sort of cousins and siblings and literary families they now belong to. So I'm curious, do you, having written this book specifically about youth homelessness, do you have any indispensable novels, books, films that are also about the subject of youth homelessness that, please be immodest here if you want to, that your book is now a cousin or a sibling of?
Well, I'll say that there's, in terms of contemporary novels about homelessness, there aren't a lot that I know about. I do. One that I quite liked was one by Russell Banks called I think it's The Lost Memory of Skin, and it's about a group of people, particularly one young man who live in an underpass, who were, it sounds much more difficult of a novel than it actually is, because he's a sex offender. And it talks about the way that this is a group of people who, if they live too close to a school or a place where they're not allowed to live, a park, sometimes they're forced into homelessness. And so he happened to notice an encampment near where he lived in Florida.
Yeah, it's based on a local scandal in Miami. Yeah, this
right,
story, yeah.
Exactly. So he ended up writing this novel, and I think he did I thought it was a good job. I read it a while ago when it came out, but I think that it's hard to think of. Of course, there's a book that just came out that I haven't read yet, which is about a homeless encampment in Tokyo. And I really do want to read that by Yu Min, and it's just been translated into English. Now there are a number of nonfiction books. Vivian Ho's outstanding book, and one that I remember really well, Travels with Lisbeth.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Remember that? And
about Austin and
right, and it followed his traveling around with his dog. Mm-hmm. And that was wonderful. And that may have made it, an impression on me. So, and if you look at classic books, there of course are many that I don't know if you call them homeless, but I mean, if you look at Huckleberry Finn or Oliver Twist, you find the story of the orphan or the person who's kicked out of a home or who left home. And those are certainly, books that sort of deal with some of this same outsider, no home theme.
Yeah. I'll take a minute here to mention in filmmaking, particularly nonfiction filmmaking, the great Indian director Meera Nair's career began by making a documentary about homeless kids in Bombay called Salam Bombay. This is, of course, before she made Monsoon Wedding and Vanity Fair and movies like that. But the movie that, the movie that made her famous was a sort of nonfiction documentary style film about homeless kids in Bombay.
Right. I know of that, and I had the incredible luck to work with the photographer Mary Ellen Mark.
Oh yeah,
and
of course.
Quite a while ago, she and I, for Life magazine, went to Sudan and did a story about kids living on the streets of Khartoum. And that was probably the thing that inspired me most and left the strongest impact on me. And I wish she were still alive for me to give her a book, because I learned a lot from her on a month long, basically being every day and every night with those kids.
Kathy, please, I have a feeling you and I feel the same way about Mary Ellen Mark's work. Please tell everybody what she is most famous, what she is most famous for.
Well, she's for the street kids. I mean, one of the things is for her incredible work with the street kids in Seattle. And I can't remember the name of the book that she did. And there's also a documentary.
Yeah, it was the article for Life magazine was called City of the Lost or something like
Right.
that. And the documentary, which came out in 1984 that she made with her husband, was called Streetwise. And
that's right, Streetwise.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And that's of course why they thought of her for this story in Sudan. And so it was an amazing experience to go there. Yeah, she is a photographer who's just done incredible work. Her work on the brothels, right, and also as well in India.
Indeed. Sadly not with us anymore, but I spent some time on the Streetwise Facebook page, which, even though the movie was made 36 years ago now, is still gets posted on a couple of times a week, and people talk about the characters, and some of the characters are still alive, and people talk about where Mary Ellen Mark's work is being shown around the world, and it's a modern classic of documentary filmmaking, and it happens to be about homeless kids in Seattle.
Well, it just, it really impressed me the way she got to know them and understood their story, and her way in. She did the same thing really in Sudan, and just working alongside of her was quite amazing. And
what an experience that must have been. Please post your questions in the chat if you have them for Kathy about Edge of the Haight or any of the other subjects we've covered here. I want to get back to this larger issue of homelessness, which of course is an issue that most people are long on opinion and short on fact. About. Everybody seems to have an opinion about homelessness, and very few of us have any real hard data to back up our opinion. I'm curious, in the course of not only writing this book but promoting it, how you, as the author of a novel about homelessness, have answered questions not only related to your book but about the issue of homelessness itself.
Well, I do. I always try and say I'm not, that I'm not, I don't have a degree in public health, and I'm not a real expert in terms of solutions and, what should be done. I just can only talk about what I've seen in the years and years I've watched and met people. But I didn't set out to write a novel on homelessness, but it was this particular event that sort of started to spin this book. And I do think that it's a difficult subject to write about, and particularly to write a novel about. And I find people, I've been surprised, to tell you the truth, that I've had a couple people who've said to me that they thought I was formerly homeless because it was only gratifying because they felt like I had captured some part of their lives. So it is something to come in and write about a world that you don't share. Except for I've lived with and alongside my unhoused neighbors for such a long time, but I am coming in and, telling that story from the point of view of somebody who's lived it. So I feel, does come a responsibility to know as much as I can, and which is why I did as much as I could on speaking to people and trying to figure out what was going on. But ultimately, I wanted to write about the stories that we don't know about each other. I mean, of course, what makes a family, and is a family you make, the connections you make. that you choose more important than a family, and can a family ever be replaced? And also, but just as we walk along the street, we know so little about the people who we pass. And sometimes we know so little about the people in our own homes. Yeah. I mean, how well do you really know your children? How well do your children know you? Not very well. They don't, they don't see you the way you see yourself. So I don't know if that answered the question. But
Yeah, I think so. This question may simply be, the answer may simply be, let's blame the New York media establishment. But like, how does, in your opinion, how does San Francisco get tarred in the national news as the only city in America with a homeless problem? I have yet to see any extensive coverage of the homeless problem in Portland or in Dallas or in any other major city in this country, and they all have homelessness as a social issue and an economic issue. So I'm curious, like to me, saying San Francisco is the only city with a homeless problem is like saying Miami is the only city with a hurricane problem. Like I'm curious to know how this became part and parcel of our reputation here, along with sourdough and cable cars.
Well, and also being, the city that's so fed up with itself that everyone's leaving, which is,
which
really true.
yes, the LA Times just released that report indicating that was nonsense.
Right, but still everybody believes that.
Yeah.
Well, in San Francisco, it gets this reputation partly from its reputation in general, which is people like to stereotype San Francisco as being this place where everybody is really progressive and they all are just fighting everything and they just have tolerance for everything, and just all of these things that are not true, that have a grain of truth, which is that we do happen to be a liberal city, but we are not a homogeneous city of like-minded people. I'm in my neighborhood in the Haight, whereas there were only 2 people who voted Republican in the last election, because I asked. We have 3 or 4 different neighborhood groups who are constantly angry at each other over everything.
Yeah.
And so there's so much disagreement, and a lot of it is over these core values and what we should do. But it's also, the thing is that it's a very visible problem here, because we, particularly as we've had more of an income gap and inequality, we have neighborhoods where people can gather, like the Tenderloin and the Haight and the Mission, and neighborhoods where they cannot gather. I mean, it would not be possible for the population that comes through the Haight to be in a lot of neighborhoods. So, that combined with the fact that we speak openly and publicly about this, and also that our climate makes it so that people live outside year-round. The homeless population in Los Angeles is actually much larger. It's larger not only in numbers, but per capita larger. And they actually just this week, there was an order that they had to clear all of the people out of Skid Row, which is thousands of people. I think it's, 7,000, 5,000 people. And they have to do it by the end of the week. They filed a lawsuit to say this is not fair. We can't do this, but they lost that. They are constantly arguing about it as well. And it is certainly not just a San Francisco and California problem. There are many more people who are homeless or living in congregate shelters in New York. That's where the biggest population is, but they're housed, if you can call it housing. So I think it's largely that it's the climate on the West Coast, and it's our political climate there's some places where you can't speak about it openly. It's not such a subject that people debate and talk about. So yes, we are certainly not the only city, as those in Tulsa know, that there is an issue of people who've lost housing, particularly during the pandemic. More people than ever are pushed into homelessness because they were staying with friends or family. They couldn't do it anymore. And it's something that cities, even suburban areas and rural areas, are seeing more than they've ever seen. And so, I think around the world, there are more people displaced now than there ever have been in recorded history. So what's happening here is a small portion of that.
Can you tell me when you were when in this process, when in the process of doing the book did the title come up, and did your non-San Francisco publisher have any concern that saying that calling it At the Edge of the Haight would be like, well, who has not visited San Francisco will know what that means? It's
right. Yeah, I had given it a different title.
Oh yeah.
And the title, and when I had finished the book and submitted it to the contest, the Bellwether Prize, and I do want to just take a second and encourage all of the writers out there to think about contests, because there are a number of contests for both nonfiction and particularly for fiction. So in a very difficult publishing landscape, there are contests. And this one, I got an email from the contest. Somebody over there, it was like a blind email, not saying who it was really from, saying, did we get your whole manuscript? Because it seems like there's some blank pages at the end. And indeed, there were some blank pages, but I had given them the whole manuscript. So I didn't, I was really surprised when it won. So one of the things that did change during the editing process was the ending, and the other was the title. And I wasn't sure whether it was a good idea to call it At the Edge of the Haight. And they were so convinced that I just let them, do it. But it hadn't, I agreed with them, but it had not been my choice. As people, as you find out when you're agonizing about the title of your novel, which we all do, they're going to change it anyway. And I think it might have even been you, Kevin, that had the strategy of, and I will do this in the future, always turn in a manuscript with your second choice. And then when you're brainstorming titles, suggest your first choice, and that might have a better chance of making it.
I don't know if it was me who suggested that, but it's a little bit like if someone's visiting and you're going to choose where to go for dinner, have like 4 choices in mind. And so don't get your heart set on restaurant X because it's like telling the universe to have something different happen.
Right.
Can we, is it déclassé to ask what was your first title for it, or do you not want to say? Or
no, it's fine. I don't think that I had a great title for it. I had titled it If You Knew. And I know why I did that. It was obviously because when you are in such close proximity to people and you have no idea about their stories, the obvious thing you say is, well, if you knew. So, but they thought it was too, it was too vague and too YA. So,
I wouldn't have said YA. I would have said it's a little Hallmark Christmas movie. But
it was it was too vague. It didn't have the kind of, it didn't have a sharp edge.
If you have questions for Kathy, because we are getting about that time, please post them in the chat. I am certainly not the most interesting person in this conversation or in this event. So I want to make sure that everybody in here gets to ask what they would like to know about Kathy or this book, or about homelessness itself, which is clearly the issue that comes from this book. Um, Admitting you are accepting that you are not a public health professional and you did not write this novel to propose solutions to the problem of homelessness. I am sure that in the course of in the course of promoting it and discussing it in public, you have been asked to weigh in on the issue. Like what has that experience been like for you? Do you feel like you are engaged in a public policy debate, an economic debate, a moral struggle?
Yeah, sort of all of those things. I mean, and there have been times when I've said I really, I'm not really an expert in policy, but I'm so obviously interested in this subject that I do share whatever it is that I've learned. And, what I've learned is, and largely from a lot of the people I've talked to, but people who've been homeless and the people who work with them. There's some wonderful organizations in my neighborhood who ran, and most recently they ran what we call a sanctioned tent site of people who had been on the street and then moved during the pandemic and moved into a safe sleep site. So, and I think one of the things that's important is for people to be met where they are, that agencies that send people to meet you on the street or to meet you in the park or to meet you at the tent site are much more easy to talk to, and it's easier to approach people from that point of view. Yeah, I must say I've gotten involved, and some people in my family would say over involved with people's stories, and especially during the pandemic when we had a very large tent encampment on our street. And I was constantly getting my husband to come and give medical care to people who were in urgent need of it. And not with always, great results, so I feel like I can't, it's important to hear people's stories and to acknowledge them. And that's what I hope that's what I hope the book does, is that people will, open their eyes to those they see on the street. And that doesn't mean every single person you see giving them money or, it's just, but let's think about who they are and what their stories are. There's actually just one thing I want to mention. There's an amazing story in a publication called Berkeley Side today that I just read today and wanted to give a shout out to, because it's an amazing, a very in-depth story about a man whose family just adored him and who they just could not ever find the right care for him. And he just tragically died on the street. But it's such an example of telling the story in depth of this man who was very loved by his family. And it just, I think doing those sorts of things are very important for people to see.
Agreed. I think I'm glad you mentioned the work your husband was doing. We can obviously cite a number of community initiatives that have come out of serving homeless populations that have begun that way and endured. The Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic began in that fashion, and Covenant House in New York and My Friend's Place in Los Angeles all began, with simple, direct one-to-one services to a homeless population, and are now admired community institutions in each of those places. Our friend Beth Weingartner brings up a question related to this for many people who do not live in the Bay Area, the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood is still very much connected to the 1960s and the Summer of Love, a period of time that lasted all of 18 months. And here we are 50 years later, 55 years later, still talking about it. You cannot walk 6 feet on Haight Street without someone offering you a tie-dyed t-shirt. Do you think that At the Edge of the Haight is helping bring the readers of this novel into the present day reality of Haight-Ashbury? Haight-Ashbury is still a thriving neighborhood. Is still a neighborhood that ordinary people live in 55 years later. And I think most people who do not live in San Francisco don't know that.
Yeah, well, I hope it does. That was, part of my intent to bring the neighborhood and its the degree to which it's sort of fighting with itself over what to do and how much indeed things have changed. There's such a commodification of the history as there is in all tourism, and San Francisco is such a tourist city. The Haight has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. It was having trouble before, and there are now more than 30 empty storefronts, and some are coming back, and I believe they will. But it had really fallen on hard times when the Summer of Love happened, and it's become unaffordable to most people. Yet it's also really fallen on hard times. It's really, there's a lot of despair on the street. And the neighborhood is really arguing about what to do. Do we want a large affordable housing complex? A lot of us do. But there's some people who don't, these people are old hippies, and they're saying it's going to cut out my sunlight. And what am I going to do about people on the street? And, it's sort of, so to go to Beth's, question. Yeah, it's not at all what it was. It tries to maintain history and roots. And yes, we have some wonderful, really tolerant neighbors who've really been out there the past year and a half trying to feed people and help people, but it's tense.
Yeah,
it's tense.
Absolutely. This particular novel strikes me as one that could take a lot of emotional and creative energy out of its creator. And maybe I'm projecting. Maybe it would just take a lot of creative and emotional energy out of me if I were the one who had written it. But I'm wondering, if that is true, or I guess even if it isn't, where does it leave you creatively? This does not, to me, feel like the kind of book where you wrap it up, you hand it into your editor, and you say, "Well, thank God that's done. Now I can write my sequel to A Year in Provence or something like the."
That is very true. It did take a lot of emotional energy, and I really found myself sort of bereft, to tell you the truth, because I know that a lot of authors feel this way, but I I really missed the characters, and I just felt like, well, where are they? Where are they? And I thought about having, sort of a book that was partly a sequel, that Maddie would show up in again so he could explain what had happened to her. And I'm told that that's very common as well. But yeah, it did take a lot out of me. And also a lot of the time I just felt like, well, instead of getting into the next creative project, I really wanted to just help people. So there's been that, I've spent a lot of time thinking, well, aside from, donations, how can I help people? What can I do? And I feel like, I know a lot of people feel that way walking around the streets of San Francisco and every major city, but yeah, it did take a lot out of me. And I find that I'm much more involved in the neighborhood now than I used to be.
what sort of conversations do you, this book is going to be released in paperback at the end of this year. What sort of conversations do you anticipate around it and the issues it raises come the paperback release, or are we asking you to peer into a crystal ball by asking that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, but I don't think these issues are going away. I think, and unfortunately, these are things that we will continue to ponder and to think about and to argue about what into the future. So I don't see these issues going away. And I think that after the pandemic, that it's going to become very clear that we have a lot of work to do, because there've been all these people and we put them in hotels and places where they can't possibly remain. So what are we going to do? And they're big questions. It's a systemic issue. It's not, going back to the San Francisco aspect of it, it's bigger than one city. It's the whole direction that we're going in terms of leaving a larger proportion of people out. And what we have flowing towards the people at the top. And that's, of course, at the root of much of this, is that we don't have a support system for people when they have children. We don't have, early childhood daycare or education that is easily, reachable by most people. And it just makes all of these issues more difficult, the lack of health care and on top of that. So I think it's a systemic problem. It's unfortunately not going away. And I don't want to, end this on we got climate change, but, but I just say we have a lot of work to do, and to know the people. We can start by trying to know the people in our community better, and probably the people in our family better, probably all the people around us. That would be a help.
I think that's very well put. I'd like to make sure that we get everybody's question if nobody has had a chance to ask what is on their mind of Kathy and about this great book that I feel really glad to have read. I will say I'm always a little, this was certainly not the case with this book, but I'm always a little hesitant to read novels by friends of mine whose novels I have not read before, because I'm always like, well, God forbid that I don't like it. And then I'm not going to stop being friends with this person because I didn't like their book. So, but I was really pleased and honored that I got a chance to spend some time with this book. And so is there anything on anybody's mind that they'd like to speak to? And if not, we will wrap this up, and we will just thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I hope people will also check out your wonderful movie, so that you can see.
That's very nice of you. Last chance, going once, going twice, going chicken soup with rice. Nothing in the, all right. Please get yourself a copy of At the Edge of the Haight by Katherine Seligman. It is a great book with great characters about an important issue. If you've never been to San Francisco, it will give you great insight into our city and probably your own. But until then, we thank Magic City Books and everybody here in Tulsa for having us. We hope to come visit you soon, and we hope you'll come visit us soon here in California. We are a lot more together. We are a lot more alike than we are different. So, Kathy, anything else?
No, I just want to thank you, and thank you for having me. And just as you all know, you probably a lot of the people here are fans of independent bookstores, but I just have to say that I live there, so they're incredibly important to me. And I did find myself, depressed when I couldn't go into the bookstore and just wander around. And now that we have some measure, some, you know, when things are a little bit better, we can even touch the books. So that I like,
Yeah.
especially for a long time, it was shop with your eyes. And now you can sort of don't touch every book, but if you can touch a lot of them and open them up. And I just love being in a bookstore, and I'm grateful to live in a city that values its independent bookstores. And thank you to Magic City Books, which is right up there with great bookstores.
Please support your independent bookstores. They are the things that make our cities and towns special. We thank you for being here, and we hope to see you again soon, Magic City. Keep well, stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.